Good morning, YouTube. Hope everybody's staying dry on this Saturday. I was looking outside earlier, and we were getting rained on pretty good here. But hopefully it's all cleared up now. I don't know if we're supposed to get any more this weekend or what. I ain't checked yet. But today's video is the history of tobacco, part 3. And this may end up being a longer video. We got a lot of ground to cover here. But hopefully we can get through it as fast and as accurately as we can. But the housekeeping, got the Roma 310, and in it, a little bit of golden slice. I do like me some golden slice. It's one of those go-to vapors, along with Navy Flake. But anyway, we'll get into the video. I'm already dragging it on longer than it needs to be. So yeah, I do got my notes down here. Like I said, there's a lot of information to keep up with, so I'll be glancing at my notes from time to time. A lot of dates, a lot of names, and a lot of them that I have trouble pronouncing, so we just decided to put it down there on the paper. Keep track of it that way. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and skip ahead to 1518. And forgive me, I can't pronounce this guy's name very good, but a fellow by the name of Juan de Gridalva. I don't know. I can't pronounce his last name. I'll put it all in the thing below here. But he lands in the Yucatan. And 1 year later, in 1519, Cortez is doing his thing on the mainland there, going through and conquering the Aztec Empire. But during that time, there's several references to the Spaniards observing the different ways that smoking is being done. One includes stuffing hollowed out reeds full of tobacco and smoking the whole thing. But we're not going to go too far into Cortez and what he was doing. That's a whole series in and of itself. Oh, we'll skip ahead. I'm going to go ahead and move this up here so I can actually read it. We're going to skip ahead to 1530. We have Bernardino de Sahagun. I don't know, I can't pronounce his name. He was a missionary, and he's the first one that distinguishes the differences between Nicotiana tabacum, which is like what we use today in the majority of our blends, and Nicotiana rustica, which is wild tobacco. Now, it's important to note that they weren't called that then, but he was the first one that actually distinguished the differences between the two. And in the future, we'll actually discuss how they ended up with those names. But that's what they weren't called that then. Skip ahead another year. In Santo Domingo, the Europeans start cultivating tobacco. I'm guessing before that, whoa! A while since that happened. Anyway, before I set myself on fire here, I guess before that they were just gathering it from the wild, but they start cultivating it in 1531. And in 1534, Nicotiana tabacum is transplanted from Central America mainland to Cuba and Santo Domingo. So, anyway. Sorry, we just had to breeze right over that. There's a lot to cover here. Now we're going to go ahead to 1535, and a fellow by the name of Jacques Carter, and I'm going to guess that's how it's pronounced. Um, I'm horrible with French too, if you can't tell. But observes tobacco being used in what is now Canada. And the reference here that I found to it was found in two places. One is in a book called Smoke and Mirrors, and the other reference claims to actually, yeah, nose itching, be from Carter's journal themselves, but I couldn't find anything. It just says taken from his journal, but I couldn't actually find, anything from the journals. So, but anyway, and again, forgive my mispronunciations of any of this. It says in Hochelaga, at the head of the river in Canada, grows a certain herb which is stacked in large quantities, or stocked in large quantities by the natives during the summer season, and in which they set a great value. Men alone use it, and after drying it in the sun, they carry it around their neck wrapped up in the skin of a small animal like a sack, with a hollow piece of stone or wood. When the spirit moves them, they pulverize this herb and place it at one end, lighting it with a firebrand, and draw on the other end so long that they fill their bodies with smoke until it comes out of their mouths and nostrils as from a chimney. They claim it keeps them warm and in good health. They never travel without this herb. So, but anyway, that's the translation or the excerpt from these two sources. And like I said, I'm going to have to do a whole lot more digging on that because, like I said, I couldn't actually find the journals that was just taken from. It just said that this was an excerpt from this journal, and then the other one was from a book called Smoke and Mirrors. So, I'm going to have to do a little bit more research on that. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about this Jacques Cartier. But anyway, he was a Breton explorer and navigator. Yeah, well, gosh, switch my notes again. Tell you what, there's a lot of information on this guy. We're not going to go over it all, but we'll just cover the meat of it. But anyway, Carter was born December 31st, 1491, in St. Malo. I guess that would have been in the Duchy of Brittany then, but it was later absorbed by the Kingdom of France. But anyway, if you notice the date, December 31st, 1491, that was just a few months, actually, before Christopher Columbus set sail on his first voyage. So it's very likely that this fellow would have grown up, hearing the stories about, the travels to the New World. Anyway, he was the first European to travel inland in North America, and claimed what is now Canada for France. See, in his early years, he became a respected sailor, and he married into a wealthy and powerful family in 1520. And in 1534, he was introduced to the King of France, which was Francis I, and was commissioned by the king to discover new lands in the New World. So, he wasn't the first to sail to North America. It was believed to be Giovanni di Verrazzano. Giovanni di Verrazzano, who was commissioned to explore the coast of North America 10 years earlier in 1524. But this fella, he never really liked to get out of the boat and explore. He'd just anchor offshore, and they'd sit there for a while and then move on. Anyway, I don't know. There'll be a picture of him up here. You've probably been looking at for a while now. But anyway, April 20th, 1534, Carter set sail, trying to find water passage to Asia. By all this time, they still hadn't figured out that they weren't in Asia. They were still trying to find a way across. Nobody realized that there was a giant continent in front of them. But anyway, that aside, took him 20 days to cross the Atlantic, and on May 10th, 1534, he explored the parts of Newfoundland and the Gulf of St. Lawrence. He stopped on Bryan Island, where his crew killed over 1,000 birds, and on the north side of Chaleur Bay was the first two encounters with natives. And, it was pretty commonplace for him to trade back and forth and all that, so that happened. And a note on the birds. There's not really a whole lot of information on what really occurred there. It just said whenever they arrived on the island that him and his crew slaughtered 1,000 birds, and it never says why. If I had to guess, I would say they were trying to supplement their food rations. That's just me. I mean, why else would you go take the time to go kill 1,000 birds? I mean, they're not exactly that easy to catch. So, I don't know. A lot of questions to be answered there, but couldn't really find any information on that. Anyway, his third encounter took place when he came ashore in the Giuseppe Bay and claimed the land for France on July 24th. Now, that act almost immediately strained relationships with the local Iroquois Indians. It seemed that they understood exactly what was going on whenever he came ashore and planted the flag and the cross and gave his whole little spiel there. They seemed to know that, hey, somebody else is claiming our land. Anyway, that raised tensions between them, and there was a little bit of back and forth, and it actually ended with Carter kidnapping the chief's two sons and holding them hostage for a while. Finally, the chief eventually agreed that they could go back to France with Carter as long as they returned with European goods to trade. And they ended up returning to France in September of 1534. And he was completely convinced that he had found Asia, which we know now that was not true. But anyway, skipping ahead, in 1535 he set sail again, and he reached St. Lawrence. He traveled upriver to, and forgive me if I pronounce this again, Stadasona? I don't know, I'll put it there. Anyway, it was the Iroquois capital. And he continued upriver from there to Hochelaga. And this is where he observed the tobacco being used. But that was what we read before the quote. He actually observed it being smoked in pipes. But he couldn't proceed any further due to the rapids in the river. But he was convinced that this river here was part of the Northwest Passage. And y'all history buffs know about the search for the Northwest Passage. It was one of the longest things, in history, or one of the longest continued search, or whatever. I don't know exactly how to word it, but any time you study the search for the Northwest Passage, it's always interesting. I think most people know the story of Franklin and his expedition, but that was also a search for the Northwest Passage, and that was still going on by the time that they were putting steam engines in boats. But anyway, they returned to their ships a few days later, in October there, and deciding it was too late in the year to sail back to France, they decided to hunker down for the winter and began preparing by salting game, fish, and reinforcing their fort that they had built, and they prepared to stay for the winter. And it ended up being a real bad winter. There was a lot of disease, scurvy set in. The local Indians did helping them with the scurvy. They made a tonic out of the bark of a spruce tree, I think is what it said. And kind of made like a spruce beer or a ginger beer, or, something along those lines, of root beer. Or an early predecessor of it. And giving it to them, and within a few days their scurvy cleared up and everybody was just fine. As far as how bad the winter was, is they reported that the ice was 1 fathom thick, which I think is like, it said 1.8 meters. 1 fathom thick, and the snow on land was 4 feet deep. So, real bad winter, and that must have been miserable. So, anyway, he ended up sailing back to France after all that was taken care of in the spring, and they were able to thaw the ships out and set sail again. And he began his third and final voyage in 1541, in which he helped out with a colonization project, and he returned to France in 1542. And the colony that he helped establish was abandoned in 1543 after disease set in, bad weather, and native attacks drove the settlers out of the area. But anyway, Carter spent the rest of his life in St. Malo and died at the age of 65 on September 1st, 1557, during a typhus epidemic. He is actually interred at St. Vincent's Cathedral. And it's important to note that no permanent settlements were established in Canada until after 1605. And I forget the guy that done that. I don't know, it's not important. We won't get into it in this video. We're already running long. But, yeah, no permanent settlements established until after 1605. But as far as Europeans trading with the Indians and stuff like that, there's not really a whole lot of written evidence. But we can assume that tobacco was being traded between the Indians and the Europeans, and then Europeans bringing it back. And I got a photo right here, and this is of the earliest known European pipe, and it has been dated back to the 1550s, and they believe that it could possibly actually be an Iroquois pipe that was brought back to Europe. So we know, at least by 1550, that pipe smoking had returned to Europe. They just don't know into what, or how widespread it was, or if it was something only, sailors were doing, or what. We don't have a whole lot of written evidence of it, and we'll get into that further in future videos. Sometimes I guess it took a little while for things to catch on and people starting to take notice. I guess what the sailors and all them were doing was something completely separate from, what the rest of society was doing. But yeah, that very well could possibly be the oldest known European pipe. But anyway, I know we didn't really talk about tobacco a whole heck of a lot in that one, but as far as that little expedition goes, that's about all we know about it. That was all that was recorded. And we'll try to get a little further in depth of, the tobacco trade in North America, Central America, South America as we go along. I'm just trying to get through the other little parts of the history before we really get into the broad and in-depth topics. Like I said, we had to skip over a whole lot because there's not a whole lot of information there, and we end up going into topics like we just did, where there's not really a whole lot of tobacco use mentioned. But what's important about this is the first European record of tobacco use in North America. So I figured I'd go ahead and include it here. But anyway, all that's a topic for another video. So until then, everybody, enjoy a good pipe. Try to stay dry out there this weekend, and we will talk at y'all later.